This evening we are in Psalm 53 and Psalm 54, and you look at it, you can see why. There's just a few, we're just kind of be cruising through it. But there's a bunch of neat stuff. There's always a bunch of neat stuff. I don't know why I say that. There's always a bunch of neat stuff when we're in God's Word. So, this evening, we're going to start off, and this is a real good thing to start off by saying, the fool in his heart has said there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable iniquity. There is none who does good. God looks down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek God. Every one of them has turned aside. They have together become corrupt. There is none who does good, no, not one. Have the workers of iniquity no knowledge, who eat up my people as they eat bread and do not call upon God? There they are in great fear where no fear was. For God has scattered the bones of him who encamps against you. You have put them to shame because God has despised them. Oh, that the salvation of Israel would come out of Zion when God brings back the captivity of his people. Let Jacob rejoice and Israel be glad. Then on to 54 where it says, save me, O God, by your name, and vindicate me by your strength. Hear my prayer, O God. Give ear to the words of my mouth. For strangers have risen up against me, and oppressors have sought after my life. They have not set God before them. Selah. Behold, God is my helper. The Lord is with those who uphold my life. He will repay my enemies for their evil, cut them off in your truth. I will freely sacrifice to you. I will praise your name, O Lord, for it is good. For he has delivered me out of all trouble, and my eye has seen its desire upon my enemies. Okay, that's where we're gonna stop. Look at that, I got my notes caught up. What am I doing here? I lost something. Isn't that great? You know, you'd think a guy that's been doing it for a while would be a little bit more organized. Okay, it starts off here under the heading of folly of godless and the restoration of Israel to the chief musician set to Mahalath, a contemplation of David. Every time I see where it says it's set to some tune, I always think, man, wouldn't that be great to hear? Wouldn't it be great to hear this at the tune that this should be set to? You know, you think about what we just did here, and the words are wonderful, but the tune brings that much more to it, right? And the singing of it. And so like Ed always talks about when he gets to heaven, he wants to check out that video on something. I want to go listen to what everything is. And let's go turn on the CDs. They probably don't have, well, we don't have those anymore either, do we? But anyway, let's listen to it in the initial original tune. Now, here it is. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Now, you may have heard this before because David wrote this also in chapter 14, verse 1. Generally, when something is significant, it is repeated. So we have to figure out that this is significant, that the fool in his heart says there is no God. You probably know somebody like that. Or maybe you were somebody like that. Or, and I'm talking, we'll be having this stuff out on the Packing House YouTube, maybe you are somebody like that who thinks that there is no God. Why do you think, what are the reasons do you think people have for denying the existence of God? Yet, you know what? That really is it. Boy, I didn't have to wait long for the right answer. Really, ego, which is pride, everything, all that. I'm the one who's going to be in charge, right? I don't want somebody else to have authority over me. You guys ever run into that when you're younger?
What do you mean younger?
Exactly. Hot rodders are not necessarily ones who like to play by the rules, right? And so we want to be in charge. But this also comes down to we're foolish if we don't surrender, right? A fool in his heart has said, there is no God. Okay. Yeah.
How says the fool in his heart says there is no God? Is there a fool for people that believe in other gods? Are they fools too?
Well, my personal opinion would be absolutely yes. If they're going there, I don't know if they're foolish, they're misdirected, but they would be. Well, you know what? How do you get to heaven?
Jesus.
Period. Right? That's it. That's it. No other, nothing else. No Jesus and Jesus or whatever. No, it's Jesus. Period. That's it. That's the one thing. So in my opinion, you would be foolish to think otherwise. Okay. Now here's something that's kind of interesting on that. There is a guy by the name of John Lennox. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. He is an Oxford mathematician and also a Christian apologist. If you get the opportunity, Google his name. Google his name. I use Goggle. Anyway, and check out some YouTubes. And there was one that I'm gonna paraphrase what all was said because I haven't committed it to memory, but it was very interesting. They had somebody say to him, he said, now, why do you worship a God that is trying to keep you from eating from the tree of knowledge? He says, because obviously you've eaten from the tree of knowledge. Again, he's an Oxford mathematician, really brilliant mind. And first of all, I want to point something out. When the guy asked him about God keeping him from eating from the tree of knowledge, what did he leave out? You got it. The knowledge between good and evil. That's what he left out. But he just said knowledge. Okay, which the deal is. And John Lennox had an absolutely wonderful answer where he said, that's a good question. That's a great question. And he said, that's a great question because as I recall, the first time it was asked by a snake. Ooh, and it was hit that guy hard. Well, and that's exactly right. What did Satan, as a snake, do for Adam and Eve? Well, did he really say you can't eat? So, no, he says we can't eat and we can't touch that tree. Of course, Eve added right off the bat, right? But that was the whole thing. What was Satan's plan? Satan's plan was to say, hey, you can be like God too. That goes back to the ego. That goes back to the pride and all this stuff. He also says, John Lennox also says, the notion that God is trying to keep us down is the original lie. And that's exactly right. That's exactly the deal. That's what Satan was doing in the garden, is saying, hey, you know what? You can be like God if you just eat the fruit, right? And sin enters the world. People will say, it's funny because people will say, now you believe in this, if you believe in this God, and this God is all powerful and all wonderful, why did the flood in Texas happen? Okay, whatever the latest disaster, why did that happen? Wouldn't God have a perfect deal? Well, actually, he did. He did. Can you imagine walking in the cool of the evening in the garden with God? It just brings goose pimples up just thinking about how wonderful that had to be. And what they do? They threw it away because they wanted to be like God. Yes. 1 Corinthians addresses this as well. 1 Corinthians 1, I'm going to read 18, if I can get the right, there we go. 1 Corinthians 1, we're going to be reading 18 to 25. And I have a story on this as well. Okay, where it says, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of the world, for since in the wisdom of God, the world through wisdom did not know God. It pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. For the Jews request a sign, and Greeks seek after wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified. To the Jew a stumbling block, and to the Greeks foolishness. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greek, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God, because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men." The first time I remember this being read, although, okay, brought up in the church, school, went to a Lutheran day school, all this stuff. But the first time I remember this really being read was at a memorial service. And the pastor got up there and read that because there was a lot of scoffers, whatever, that were there for this memorial service. And that hit me so much. I thought, I have a relative who became too educated to believe in Jesus anymore. And I read that and I said, bingo. That's what nails it right there. Foolishness to them. And it's just amazing how right here it just fits so much in. Because the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. We can just go out, look outside, Hey, there's not a whole lot of smog today. But also just look at the creation out here. This didn't just happen by happenstance. There's Frank Peretti had this really great illustration. He's a Christian artist, author, and he's talking about it didn't happen that there's all this gas out in nowhere, and this gas is going along and they bump into each other and say, I know, let's become matter. It doesn't happen like this. This is the kind of deal that shoots down all this evolution jive and all this kind of stuff, because to be able to just do that, think about it. The ability to just do that. Who can figure that out? It had to have been intelligent design. So again, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt and have done abominable iniquity. There is none who does good. They are corrupt. They have done abominable iniquity. And again, what is that from? All from denying God. All from denying the existence of God. Now, here it is. Derek Kidner says, this is no exaggeration, since every sin implies the effrontery of supposedly knowing, here it is, knowing better than God, and the corruption of loving evil more than good. This is, as you can probably agree with me, is very prevalent in modern society. However, here's a quote from Spurgeon from the 19th century, right? There is too much dainty dealing, here it is, here's the word, nowadays, with atheism. It is not a harmless error. It is an offensive, putrid sin, and righteous men should look upon it in that light. That's back in the 19th century. We're 2 centuries ahead of that, right? And it says nowadays. This has been going on, friends and neighbors, for a very long time. Okay, ever since there's a gal. I used to teach a Bible study of a bunch of World War II vets, right? Between service Bible study, and there's this one gal that I used to look at her and say, if Eve hadn't screwed up, we'd be doing so much better. And it just wind her tight. And it was just so much fun, You know, she was in her 90s and giving her a hard time. Probably shouldn't have done that. Might have pushed her over the edge. But anyway, you know, see, that's the deal. Since that time, since the fall, this has been going on. Okay? Verse 2, God looks down from heaven upon the children of men. As opposed to who? Child of God. As opposed to the child of God, he's looking down at children of men to see if there are any who seek God. Here's something. It's been said that even if you try to forget about God, he does not forget about you. You know? And again, how many people do we know that have this issue? That have to, well, there can't be a God because of all this stuff. There can't be a God because it just doesn't make any sense, blah, blah, blah. Our response is to always be prepared to tell someone for the reason of our trust in Jesus Christ. And that's it. And that's it. Is it simple? Is it easy? No. I use this analogy all the time. It's always easy to tell somebody that you really ought to own a Studebaker because those were the greatest cars that were ever built. That may not be true. But anyway, you easy to say, okay, get this refrigerator, do whatever. But when we have something that really means something, that will keep somebody from burning in hell, we have a hard time telling them that. We need to be bolder. We need to be bolder. Okay, now, verse 3. Every one of them, children of men, has turned aside. They have together become corrupt. There is none who does good, not a one. Here's another Spurgeon quote. What a picture of our race this is. Save only where grace reigns, there is none that doeth good. Humanity, fallen and debased, is a desert without an oasis, a night without a star, a dunghill without a jewel, and hell without a bottom. There is a good quote. I like these guys. You know, Spurgeon says it, Luther says it, calls different things like that dunghills. I think that's a pretty good deal because it's appropriate. Okay, now. Verse 4, have the workers of iniquity no knowledge, who eat up my people as they eat bread, and do not call upon God. Have the workers of iniquity no knowledge. And here's something that I believe you may have heard before, Psalm 111, verse 10, where it says, the fear of the Lord is what? Beginning of wisdom, a good understanding. Have all those who do his commandments, his praise endures forever. The fear of the Lord. Now, there are times when we get confused about what's the deal about fearing God. You know, should we be afraid that he's going to smack us or something like that? Or should we be afraid, or should have fear as a healthy reverence? Thank you. There's the word that was the R word that wasn't coming up at the time. Yeah, healthy reverence for him. Actually, I think sometimes we need to be fearful that he's going to spank us. Really, think about that. Think about that. When you're a kid, there are times when you didn't do something because you knew you're going to get a whooping, right? That's a bit of a deterrent. Yeah, that's right. Now, then there's other times when you were just being, I got in trouble, and I ended up telling, the teacher says, you stay here or else. And I said, or else. And I left the classroom because it was time for lunch. Obviously, you need to leave. You can't be sticking around class any longer because it's time for lunch. Well, I'm out at lunch, and she says, well, it's time for or else. Went and I got 3 swats. Does that make me real bright? Obviously not. But later on, that can be a deterrent. So when you get concerned about that, but again, it's beginning. Okay, verse 5. There they are in great fear where no fear was, for God has scattered the bones of him who encamps against you. You have put them to shame because God has despised them. Okay, here they are being afraid where they had no reason to fear, because they had no fear, understanding of God. Isn't that interesting? Having fear where there was no reason to fear. I have a relative who has turned their back on the Lord, who is concerned about dying. Yeah, how about that? And my grandson, who is very perceptive, says, well, that's because they don't know where they're going. So that's fear where fear need not be. You know, I'm not afraid of dying. Absolutely not afraid of dying. Sometimes the process might be a little bit of a bummer, but otherwise I'm not afraid of dying because I know where I'm going. And I want to say that I look around this room and I'll bet everybody here has that same thought. You know where you're going. So it's okay. You know, it's not like I'm going to go out and try something silly. Well, maybe not this week. But, you know, it's kind of one of those deals where, you know, there's nothing to be afraid of these things. Okay, it says, for God has scattered the bones of him who encamps against you. It said, those who attack you for your faith. Somebody encamping against you in this instance is somebody who's attacking you for your faith. You ever had that? You know, it goes back to that deal with John Lennox, where the guy says, I don't understand how you could worship a God that wants to keep you from going to the tree of knowledge, because obviously you've gone to the tree of knowledge a lot. And of course, the guy leaves out the knowledge of the difference between good and evil. Okay, it's interesting that. But he was attacking, I'm not attacking you of your faith, I'm just asking you this. Horse manure. You know, that's exactly what they're doing. Okay. And the next thing is it says, you have put them to shame because God has despised them as they despise him. You know that? God is loving. He wants everyone. He wants that, you know, he wants that no one should go to hell. And people say, well, how can your loving God send somebody to hell? He doesn't. They do it under their own volition. You know, they make that decision. There's something about that free will deal that it hits that hard. Verse 6, oh, that the salvation of Israel would come out of Zion when God brings back the captivity of his people. Let Jacob rejoice and Israel be glad. The captivity of the people, where God relieves the oppression. And let Jacob and Israel be glad at the coming Messiah who would come out of Zion, Jesus. Isn't that great? You know, it is just so neat. God used David in a mighty way, writing many of these Psalms, and can put this down in words that this stutter, stumbling mouth can't compose. And it is so good that we have this, that we can read this. And we continue on tonight. It's under the heading of Answered Prayer for Deliverance from Adversaries. And it's to the chief musician, stringed instruments, a contemplation of David when the Ziphites went and said to Saul, is David not hiding with us? Let's look at 1 Samuel 23, verse 19, where it says, then the Ziphites came up to Saul in Gibeah and saying, is David not hiding with us in strongholds in the woods, in the hills of Hakaliah, which is on the south of Jeshem? So here they are saying, okay, isn't David doing this? They're saying this to Saul. Pretty much what they're doing is they're throwing David under the bus. They're ratting him out. They're saying, David's up here. Why don't you go after him? Ziphites. You guys ever heard of Ziphites? That's pretty interesting. You know, there's a guy who was a stand-up comedian that was doing a lot of Ole and Lena jokes. And here he is, and he gets in trouble for somebody is being offended by the Ole and Lena jokes. As a matter of fact, he gets a cease and desist letter from the head of the council against the oppression of displaced Scandinavians. Okay, it says you need to cut this out. You can no longer do these Ole and Lena jokes. And so this guy's thinking, man, I make my living doing this. I got to come up with something else. So he's reading this very verse, and he sees Ziphites. Well, there's no Ziphites left. I can make fun of Ziphites. So he gets up there the very next day, and he says, I have some new material for you. It's on Ziphites. And they said, oh, really? He says, yeah, there's these two Ziphite guys. Yeah, Sven and Ole. Okay. But we had some earlier Ole and Lena jokes. Do what you want to? Okay, here it is. Pastor says it's okay. Here's Ole. He lives across the river from Clarence. And Clarence are always going back and forth. Whoa, good job. Going back and forth. If I ever catch you, I'm just going to beat you soundly. Well, the county comes in and builds a bridge across the river. And Lena says to Ole, hey, Ole, what's this deal? You do not go over there, beat up that Clarence like you say you're going to do. And Ole says, well, by golly, that's exactly what I'm going to do. So Ole takes off, gets to the bridge, stops, looks at the sign, turns around, goes back, sits down, starts reading his paper and drinking his coffee. And Lena says, what's this deal? What you doing? Ole says, oh, you know that Clarence? He don't look so real big on the other, from over this side, but I got there's a sign that says, Clarence, 13 foot, 6 inches. Should I go on, or should I leave the other one alone? Yeah, good. It's pretty good. Ed and I have been going back and forth recently about, trying to keep each other from getting in trouble, because our minds run the same way. But anyway, okay, so here it is. Here we start off in verse 54. Verse 1 of 54. Save me, O God, by your name, and vindicate me by your strength. God's name is what? Holy and powerful. Right? Your name and your strength. And you think about this. How many times do you hear somebody say Buddha damn? Or they say Muhammad, or they say Joe Smith, or any of these other things. Do you hear this? They always take the name of God in vain. It's either saying, you get people all the time, Jesus Christ, pardon me, saying it in that manner. And I finally look at him and say, he's here to help you, but if you talk to him like that, come on, let's straighten this out. And it was good being a good Lutheran boy going through confirmation. Pastor Grauman said a statement that stuck with me that I couldn't believe. He says, God damn it is a true statement. He says, because he's the only one who can. He says, but saying that is taking his name in vain, and you ought not do that. And for an impressionable 14-year-old boy, that really hit home. But that is a true statement. He's the only one who can. But you're not to call on his name to do it. And you're not to take his name in vain. Because his name, as you save me, O God, by your name, and vindicate me by your strength. There's strength just alone in his name. Okay. Hear my prayer, O God. Give ear to the words of my mouth. There's something here. I've probably told you this more than once. I'm a blessed man. Did you guys know that? I am a blessed man. And one of the blessings over the last 7 years, when I got to tell you guys this story. It was after the 4th of July, the first time that I was the MC for the 4th of July. And it was after that, and here we are at Donuts, and Ed's over there in his AV8 with Winston, and I walked up to him and I said, I got to talk to you about church. And Ed says, doesn't surprise me, Willie. I knew you were going to come over here. And so again, that was the beginning of this relationship that I'm so blessed to have, right? Well, part of that is also going to men's prayer. Now, if you guys get the opportunity, I think it's a great idea. First and third Fridays of the month. There are a bunch of sissies now that Rick is running. It's at 7 o'clock instead of 6 o'clock in the morning.
They're the ones who asked to change it.
Oh, that's not what I heard. So what we have is a bunch of old guys that don't get out of bed as early as, okay, but again, just as here, we start off with worship, and here it is from Psalm 5. And I just love this. Give ear to my words, O Lord. Consider my meditation. Give heed to the voice of my cry, my King and my God. For to you I will pray. My voice you shall hear in the morning. O Lord, in the morning I will direct it to you, and I will look up.
That's an old Calvary Chapel song.
And it's beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful. And there it is. Here we are in Psalm 54, verse 2, where it says, Hear my prayer, O God, give ear to the words of my mouth. And you know what? He does. He does. Even from a nitwit, hot rodder guy like me, he listens to my prayer. And it's just beyond. We get to talk to God. Think about that. We get to talk to God, and he listens to us, even when we do stupid stuff. Verse 3, strangers have risen up against me, and oppressors have sought after my life. Okay, again, this is the tribe of Ziph, the Ziphites. And why is he talking about this? Because they finked on him. They finked on him to Saul and set him up so Saul could go after him. Right? Yeah. Okay. They have not set God before them. Selah. And what does that mean? Well, there's no specific, but for the most part, it's pause. Let's take a pause. Right here, we think about this, we look at that. You hear the words of my mouth, and these strangers have risen up against me, and they have not set you before them. And you just meditate on that pause. I think that's something that we all need to do more often. We're talking about that again. It's funny, we get all these things that we talk about just before the study. Gee, what a coincidence. It couldn't have anything to do with praying, Lord, send your Holy Spirit upon me so this doesn't go so rotten. That can't have anything to do with that. This is all coincidence. But we're talking about filling up every minute of our days. You guys do that? Maybe not so much now, but was there a time when you were being so very efficient that you were filling up every minute of your day? I was talking to a guy this morning, neat guy, talking about how when people come into his shop when he's working and talking to them, he stops and says, "You're taking money out of my pocket. You're stealing minutes." And then we got to talking about that, and that's not true. Because there are times, I was one of the worst guys with this. Guys would call up on the phone, "When's my car going to be done?" What's the answer? A heck of a lot sooner if I ever get off this lousy telephone. That kind of stuff. And really, if you take a few minutes to pause, it doesn't rob your day. It really doesn't. And that is something that I've had to work on. I'm in efficient guy, man. You know, I got to get all this stuff. I got customer cars got to be out on efficient time. I got to make sure these guys working for me aren't standing around with their finger in their nose or anything like that. You know, we got to get, this has got to go bing, 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 bing. Oh no, there's a panic. Silly. It's silly. We need to take that time. We need to take that time to pause. God has placed us with that. Yes, Paul.
Sounds like good marriage counsel too.
Ooh, you're right. You're right. It's one of those things where, again, not everything that falls out of your, well, actually comes to mind falls out of your brain, out of your mouth. Then I'll get it out. Not everything that comes to mind should fall out of your mouth. Yeah, how's that? Yeah, because we do that. We need to pause. Good marriage counseling, as you say. And actually, that's just good. That's just a good thing for everybody. What is it? What is it? Slow to anger. Quick to listen. Yep, exactly. Quick to listen, slow to speak. But when you're being efficient, you know. Yeah. Just for a little while now. Working on it just for a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Behold, God is my helper. The Lord is with those who uphold my life. David has the tendency to acknowledge the sovereignty of God. We ought to do the same. Now, verse 5, he will repay my enemies for their evil. Cut them off in your truth. Not fearing his enemies, because he does have confidence in the name. We go back up here to verse 1, in God's name and strength. Right? He's not fearing his enemies. Is he not fearing his enemies because he's such a tough warrior? Well, that might play into it. Think about it. He was. You think about that. But that's not the deal. What happens when we decide to do these things, whether it be having some sort of when you have the spiritual gift of sarcasm, there are times when you open up like that and you get done and it doesn't necessarily feel good. You really ought to depend upon the Lord instead of your own mouth to do that. I don't know anybody who has that. Okay. And we go on to say in verse 6 where it says, I will freely sacrifice to you. I will praise your name, O Lord, for it is good. What does he mean by freely sacrifice to God?
Give without reservation.
Yeah, and without compulsion, being under compulsion, right? Oh, you need to do this. Did you know that you better give a tenth to the church? You know that's what a tithe is, and so that's what you have to do. You know, and get the thumb, have somebody put the thumb on you, and that's what you have to do. You know what? It's interesting that really a tenth was just kind of the minimum thing that you should do. But there is nowhere does it say that you need to have Jesus in your life and give 10% to the church to be saved. It doesn't say that. But this is it. I will sacrifice freely. Why? In response to what has been given. You know, that's the whole thing. It's a response, a free response. And I will praise your name, O Lord, for it is good. Again, in response to the goodness and grace of God. What did we do? What did we do before we started? We had a bunch of guys singing praise. And I you know what? I bet you if you go back and you look at all the videos that had been done, I probably say it every time. Man, it sounded good. You know, it really did sound good. It's probably because I kept my voice down. But you know, really thinking about it though, really it does sound good. When you get a group of men singing praises to God, it sounds great. It is just absolutely powerful. Now, Verse 7 says, "For he has delivered me out of trouble." I got a bunch of Spurgeon quotes tonight. This is the last one of them, though. David lived a life of dangers and hair-breadth escapes, yet was he always safe. So to put that in a more modern English, David was always just by the hair of his chinny chin, and he always still was able to escape because of what God has delivered him from all trouble. Goes on to say, "And my eye has seen his desire upon my enemies." David was an eyewitness. Think of Goliath, huh? Think about Goliath. And that really gets me. You know, here we got all these guys that are too chicken to go up against this guy. And this guy is spewing all kind of terrible stuff. And here comes David. And he's just a shepherd boy. And he takes him out with a sling. Right? Well, what had God been doing with David all that time when he was out and herding no sheep? Yeah, boy, was he ever preparing them. Yeah. And I heard a guy talk one time that by the weight of the stone and by the velocity that it left the sling, that it was compared to a single shot 45. So who was out in front on this? Who was really the one that who had the advantage? It wasn't Goliath. It wasn't him. It was David. And why did David have the advantage? Because God prepared him. And what else did David do? He answered the call. He answered the call, and he did that. Okay. Questions, comments, smart aleck remarks. Richard.
One comment. The
Go.
first time I came here a couple months ago, I went home and I told the wife, I was blown away. These guys can sing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was impressed. How come they can't sing this good in the church?
Well, you got to have the right bunch. It's like.
And then she said, well, what else you talk about? I said, right stuff.
That's really it. I got to go on, and please don't take this for anything other than it is. I am blown away about how blessed I am that God placed me in the position that He has. Because all those years of going through various ministry training and all this kind of stuff, and you get to talk to guys, hot rod guys, and what ended up happening, being at a traditional Lutheran church, they'd show up. You know what? Hot rodders don't necessarily cotton to 16th century European worship styles. Did you know that? They really don't rush cotton to it. And then by getting a phone call to say, hey, would you lead us in prayer? And then, hey, would you be the MC? Look what God has been able to do. Using a nitwit hot rodder like me to be with guys like you guys that are the greatest guys, because we have a shared love of things mechanical. It doesn't necessarily have to be a hot rod. We were talking about wind machines last night. Man, that stuff really good. Oh, well, if you're brought up in this area, all the different wind machines that are running around in orange groves, what powered a wind machine back in the day? Flathead Forge, yeah, pair of them, right? Pair of them, open stacks with a war surplus propeller. And you stand up on that tower and that thing's going along with the propeller going around and it opens. Man, I think that's where God's going to put me when it comes to heaven. I'm gonna be But it's just neat that God is able. My passion is to share the gospel with. I would want for none of my friends and loved ones to miss the chance of going to heaven. How's that? And the fact that I've been working on automobiles since I was 4 years old, being able to have that all work together, I asked a pastor years ago. I says, how'd you know when you got the call? You get the call, right? How'd you know when you got the call? because I was kind of feeling a little bit moved that way. And he says, Willie, you've got a call. It's to work on cars. We all have a call. There is something that God has allowed us to do, whether it's to use this, or if you're not that bright like I am, use your hands type of thing. But you know what I'm trying to say is there's something that God has called each and every one of us to do, and each and every one of us has the opportunity to use that to glorify Him. Isn't that neat? It is just too cool. Too cool. All right, let's close in prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, we just thank you that you have given each and every one of us a talent that we can use to glorify you, no matter what that is, Lord. If we do it to your glory, we can show others your graciousness because you have called us. Lord, we thank you for that. And Lord, again, we lift up our friends who are either recovering or are having surgery or whatever. Lord, just be with them. Wrap your loving arms around them and help them to recover quickly. Lord, I thank you so much for these men. I pray your blessing on each and every one of them. And I pray this in Jesus' most holy name. Amen. Amen. All right, guys.